So that concludes the French movement phase. Now I have to declare who is going to attack who. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of push these guys up against the guys they're going to attack. And you must declare who is attacking who before you actually engage in any of the combat. So this is going to be the situation here. And I'm going to resolve these battles starting with the battle up here in the north against the Prussian First Corps. I'm going to take the second and the third French Corps against that Prussian boy. So that's going to be a total of 5 attack factors versus 3 defender factors. So the attacker, the French, are going to be in the +2 column. At this point, the attacker has the choice to spend a morale point in order to commit reserves. And if you look at the morale table on the player aid card, you'll see it says at the bottom there, towards the bottom, it says increase your side strength in a battle by +1 by committing the reserves. Now you can only spend 1 morale point to do so. At this point, I don't think that that's a worthwhile expenditure for the French. Steve, just for grins, what would you do as the Prussians here? Would you take that? Okay, Steve says definitely hold out. So the Prussians are just going to sit there and see how this takes off. So it's going to be the +2 column. We roll a d6. Die roll is a 3. And if we cross-index that on the combat results table, we see that that is a DW result, which means that the defender withdraws. All defeated units in this battle must retreat 1 hex. The victor conducts any advance after combat. So we're going to go ahead and back him up 1, and he could back up here or here. And I'll tell you what, we're going to actually back him up into hex 508. Now the attacker has the option of who do they want to advance after combat. We're going to go ahead and advance this guy. Now if a cavalry unit is involved in the battle, the cavalry unit must advance. There's no choice there. So cavalry units got to advance whenever there's an opportunity to do so. Let's see. One other thing I need to check on here. Okay. We're going to go ahead and take the next attack. Tell you what, we'll go ahead and take the attack on, let's go ahead and hit Ligny. So it's going to be 6 versus 3. Now look at the terrain in Ligny. It's a town, and if you look at the TEC or terrain effects chart, you'll see that town terrain applies a +1 modifier to the defender. So the defender in there is actually a 4 strength unit. So it's actually going to be 6 to 4. So again, it's a +2 column advantage. The French are not going to spend morale. I would say the Prussians would go ahead and hold here, not spend the morale at this point. So let's go ahead and dice that. And that's going to be a 4 on the +2 column. Now that is a DW result again. Now, retreat priorities. Whenever you retreat, you have to retreat, if possible, towards one of your line, to a hex that's closer to one of your locks. So the Prussians actually have 2 locks, and they can choose which one they want to retreat toward. Now, they can't retreat into here because it's enemy occupied. They cannot retreat into hex 408 because that's enemy occupied, and so forth. They could retreat into here. That's a zone of control hex, however, and that would be what's called a hazardous retreat. So instead what's going to happen is they're going to retreat in hex 508, but it's occupied. Now they have to retreat 1 more hex, so they have to move closer to one of their locks. I would say let's move to this one. Steve, did we get that one correct? Yep, we got that right. All right. So the Imperial Guard advances after combat here, which is actually very important because if you look at the morale chart, if the Imperial Guard doesn't have the opportunity to advance after combat, then there is a -1 to your morale. And that's on the morale chart. That's a nasty thing. So when you commit the Guard, you better be hoping that you win that battle. Okay, we got 1 more to fight, and that's going to be a 2 to 2 here in hex 510. French decide they're not going to spend any morale here, but now the Prussians actually have an interesting choice now. Because if they spend a morale, then there's a greater chance that the attacker would encounter a rout result. And if they encounter a rout result, then there's a chance that both of those units could rout in such a way that each one could inflict a -1 hit to the French morale. So I'm just going to say for grins here, let's take the Prussians and let's go ahead and commit reserves. So the Prussians commit reserves. Now the attacker always commits first, so it makes for a very tough decision for the attacker. But since the French forwent that, they can't go back and change their mind now. So it's going to be 2 attackers versus 2 defenders, plus the one for the defenders committing the guard. So the attackers are going to fire on the -1 column. And the die roll comes in at a 4, and a 4 is an end result, which means there is no effect. So everybody just stays in place, stays where they are, and the Prussian Third Corps is basically locked in place. So that was a bad result for the Prussians. They were really hoping to at least force the cavalry back so they'd have freedom of maneuver. Well, that completes the first half of the game turn, and I guess the game turn marker doesn't flip. Okay, so we're going to go on to the Allied side of the battle, and now here's where it's going to start getting interesting, because now we're going to encounter the random event. So I'm going to draw one off the chart, or off the deck here, onto the map. And the very first one we draw here is going to be, it's going to have 2 results on it, first of all. And what you're going to do is you're going to look, if you're the French, you're going to look at the blue portion. If you're the Allies, you're going to look at the bottom or the red portion. Some cards will only have one portion, which is applicable to either side. Now, this one here, it says march to the guns. It says you may move up to 2 units, 1 additional movement point each, if and only if the unit ends its movement adjacent to an enemy unit. So that's going to allow the Allies here perhaps to get into contact with the enemy. Alright, so we're going to leave that on the map as a reminder of what's going on. Now, this particular unit here, the Prussian Third Corps, is frozen in place, as is the First Corps. So the only guys we have to maneuver with are the Prussian Second Corps and the Allied First and the reserves. Now, the Allies got a tough decision to make here, because they have a card that would allow the Reserve Corps to actually move 4 hexes and get into contact with the French. They could do that by moving entirely along the road to here. You get 1 more movement point by moving along the road, and then you get an additional movement point because of the random event. Something else I didn't mention in the last turn is you can spend a morale point to force march. When you spend a morale point, you can give all of your units +1 movement point for the rest of that movement phase. So that's something you can take on any turn, but again, it costs you a morale point to do. The Allies are already down a morale point, and that's probably not a good expenditure at this point in time. I would say right now, probably the best thing to do would be to start backing up, because the Prussians really don't want to. The Prussians want to remain a threat, but they don't want to get chewed up here and mauled by the French. So I'm going to go ahead and take Second Corps here and back him up 1 and 2 into the woods. Now, if he was already located here, as soon as he moves into the woods on the TEC says you have to stop. So it doesn't matter how many movement points you got left, you have to stop as soon as you enter woods, unless you're moving along a road. And you enter that hex along that road. Now, the Anglo-Allies, First Corps, is an elite unit. But here's something important. In the next version of the game, I'm pretty sure they're going to have a black movement rating for him, because he does not have to spend morale points to move into contact with the enemy. In other words, he's not treated as a guard unit. So you don't have to spend morale to use him in combat to move adjacent to somebody. But you'll see how I have the French all lined up in a line. If I move in here, then I have to attack both the cavalry and I got to attack the infantry, and I'm only going to have a +1. And chances are he could move too far forward and get surrounded. So that's probably not a good move. If I move in here, I have the same problem, only worse perhaps. So I'm actually going to back him into Quatre-Bras and see if we can't hold the village. To support him, I'm going to take the reserves and I'm going to move him 1 and 2. By moving adjacent to him, it's going to make it a little bit tricky for the French to gang up on the First Corps. Plus, I'm kind of shielding the British right flank where his reinforcements are going to start coming on. All right, so that's going to be first part of the turn here. Now we have combat. I'm going to pause here for a second. I realize I'm just talking a lot. Does anybody have any questions so far? Pretty meat and potato stuff here. Okay, next we go to the reserve phase. If you look at the play aid, it says now we have, reaction, not reserve, reaction phase. During the reaction phase, the cavalry have some interesting decisions to make. Cavalry, if they are not in the zone of control of an enemy cavalry unit, can choose to retreat before battle. And basically, these two cavalry boys could back up and go 1, 2, like that, or this guy here could actually move down like so. If you backed up like that, then the attacker, the French Third Corps, would be frozen in place. He could not advance after that. So that's not combat, and so he can't advance. So that's a way that cavalry can effectively stall an advancing army, even though they're really under strength. So if you're facing only infantry, these cavalry guys can really be a pain in the neck. The other thing that they could do is they can do what's called a countercharge. Now, with a countercharge, what you can do is the cavalry get to attack the one enemy unit that is in their zone of control. So, let's say, for example, that we had this situation. The French 2nd Cavalry Corps is in the zone of control of 2 Prussian units right now. He could, with a countercharge, contrary to normal combat rules, he would have to attack both of them unless somebody else is attacking that 2nd Corps. To put it better, let me back everything out to here. If this were the situation, this cavalry unit would have to attack. It would be compelled to attack both of these Prussian units. But in a countercharge situation, he can selectively choose one enemy unit and simply attack that one. And he's doing it preemptively. So he gets to do that before the actual combat phase. So there's a chance that he could, do something harmful to the infantry. Now, Steve, I got a question here for just a second. And could the 2 cavalry units gang up? I got the rules in front of me, but I can't remember or not if they could actually combine together. Oh, and I should also mention that the cavalry, when they're countercharging against infantry, their attack strength is doubled. But I can't remember if the 2 can combine or if it's done individually. I think it's done individually. Yeah, I can't recall either. I'm going to look it up really quick because now I'm curious. I don't know why I hadn't thought of this before. Yeah, usually I have a situation where there's just, one cavalry in a ZOC. I don't recall being in a situation before. Okay, it's 8.2, unhinging the enemy. I don't see anything that prohibits it.